Gen X are addicted to ultra-processed foods and it's costing us our health, apparently. So as women of a certain age, let's chat about it. An article by the journalist Stephen Armstrong in The Independent a couple of weeks ago caught my eye. I'm firmly in the middle of Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, and I'm interested in health. So in this video, I'll run through the article and its claims about food addiction and midlife health, and I'll delve a little deeper into some of the bigger themes, because some of it is more than a little contentious, and I have thoughts, as no doubt do you, so I'd love you to share them in the comments. Just let's keep it respectful. I'll also share 3 practical tips for reducing the number of ultra-processed foods in your diet if that's something you'd like to explore. And one quick heads up before we begin, I am going to be using terms like addiction and binge eating, so if they're things you'd rather not hear right now, feel free to give this one a miss. So let's rewind a bit. So Gen X, we grew up in the 70s and 80s, a time of big societal shifts. Rates of divorce were rising and 2 parents working became the norm. Childcare wasn't always available. So we were the latchkey kids, resilient, independent, with more than a hint of badassery. The fall of communism, the rise of capitalism and the dawn of MTV brought with it a reputation for cynicism and disillusionment. The 80s also saw a rapid expansion in the processed food industry. Our childhoods were wrapped in bright packaging, free toys and artificial flavours. Some notable examples from my childhood include Pop-Tarts, which had the look and consistency of cardboard filled with a sickly sweet goo. Finder's crispy pancakes, more goo, this time molten and savoury, in some alarmingly orange breadcrumbs. And Bernard Matthews turkey drumsticks, which were the delightfully named mechanically recovered meat in a light golden crumb. Got a favourite from your country? Let me know in the comments. Now, the newspaper article opens with Joe Wicks and his recent Channel 4 documentary, again here in the UK, called License to Kill. Joe Wicks, also known as the Body Coach, is a fitness coach and TV personality. His online workouts during COVID kept kids healthy during the lockdown, and for that I will concede he does deserve respect. But some of his comments more recently have been a little bit problematic, and I'm going to come on to that in a minute. Now, for the documentary, he created a chocolate orange protein bar filled to the legal limit with multiple ingredients which he labelled as dangerous. The result was a manufactured snack which is designed to shock. And you can buy it online for the princely sum of £2.29. Now, some ingredients sound scary because they're using their chemical name, but some of them are just vitamins. But the ingredients list is very long because they're trying to make a point. And the point is raising awareness around ultra-processed foods. Now, the article says that the bar's contents have been linked to gut issues, cancer and even early death. Now, these are strong claims and it very much sets the tone. It then references a recent study from the University of Michigan. They don't link it, but it's pretty easy to find and it's in the journal Addiction. It surveyed adults aged 50 to 80 in the US using something called the modified Yale Food Addiction Scale. And researchers found that 21% of women and 10% of men in the Generation X age range fitted the criteria using this scale for food addiction. And by comparison, the older baby boomers in the same study, well, they had lower rates, 12% for women and just 4% for men. And their assumption is that this food addiction is an addiction to UPF foods, which is fair enough because in reality, who craves lettuce? Now, one theory is that the rapid rise in industrialised food hit Gen X at a crucial point in our development, so childhood and adolescence. And this is when our palates, our habits and our coping mechanisms formed in that environment. And the article also considers whether 90s diet culture accounts for the higher rates in women. Remember, that was the decade of the Biggest Loser and heroin chic, as well as endless diet foods where fat was replaced by sugar or artificial sweeteners, and they were heavily marketed. It suggests that this diet messaging back then is now playing into our current struggles with food. The article also mentions that half of Mounjaro users, so that's one of the new weight loss injections, are aged between 40 and 59. So perhaps this points to something more deep going on than just preference or habit. And as for the solutions, well, the journalist spoke to a group of researchers at UCL, that's University College London. They're doing a project working with a group of healthcare workers trying to reduce their consumption of UPFs. And they're doing this using a mixture of one-to-one support, group sessions, and behavioural change coaching. And I know that works because it's very similar to what I do with my clients. Now, here's where things get a little bit more nuanced. And this newspaper article makes two key assumptions. Firstly, that food addiction is a real and distinct condition. And secondly, that all UPFs are harmful. But both ideas are debated, so let's unpick them one at a time. First, food addiction. Now, food addiction isn't a distinct and recognised psychiatric diagnosis because it's not in something called DSM-5, and this is the diagnostic manual for all psychiatric conditions. Now, some researchers argue that it should be because there's aspects of addiction which do translate to food. For example, continued eating despite it having an effect on self through weight gain, unsuccessful attempts to cut down, and a feeling of a loss of control. But others argue that labelling food as addictive oversimplifies something that's really complex. Now, it's true that on functional brain imaging, hyperpalatable foods, well, they light up areas in the brain on MRI, but so does being in love or looking at pictures of puppies. And the fact that we respond to pleasurable things isn't in itself proof of addiction. Critics also point out that because food is necessary survival, you can't abstain, and much of what gets labelled as food addiction overlaps with something called binge eating disorder, and that is a distinct condition with its own set of diagnostic criteria. There is some evidence of genetic differences in reward sensitivity, so how rewarding and how drawn we are to foods which are fatty or sugary. But again, this doesn't automatically mean addiction. But if food isn't addictive in the same way that drugs are, why do we find it so difficult to stop eating UPFs? Sometimes it's about time, energy, and emotional load. These foods are convenient and they're quick. And if we're busy at work or stressed or juggling caring responsibilities, they're easy. And they taste pretty good too. They're engineered to. And what about quitting sugar altogether and doing a detox? Well, I personally think that's unrealistic and unhelpful. The idea that we need to detox is pretty nonsensical. Our kidneys and our liver do that job brilliantly. And more importantly, the act of food restriction often leads to the habit we're trying to avoid. Now, much of the early evidence for food addiction comes from studies with rats. They deprived them of food for a period and then gave them sugar, and they overate it. And this kind of mimics what humans do. If we are eating a very restrained or restrictive way and we completely cut out of food, we can find ourselves starting to think about it all the time and crave it because, we always want what we cannot have. This is human nature. And then this leads to a risk of overeating it. It's called the avoidance violation effect. You slip up, you think you've blown it, and then you go all in. And that brings us back to Joe Wicks. Now, early in August, he shared a post on his Instagram feed where he described a relapse from his sugar detox. And this had been to some fruit and some Jaffa cakes. And to the uninitiated, or Jaffa cakes are kind of like a hybrid between a cake and a biscuit, our word for a cookie. They've got a slightly too dry, spongy base with some sort of tart orange gel with a layer of plain chocolate on top. And because British people like to do this, we've obviously long debated whether they are indeed a cake or a biscuit. But we all agree they're pretty good. And cue a big wave of backlash. And understandably, so nutrition professionals criticised his messaging and his language, particularly the use of the word relapse. Because this sort of language and demonising sugar leads into feelings of shame and disordered eating. It paints a picture of food as something really dangerous and morally charged. And this again is part of the problem because it drives people to cycle between restriction and overeating. So let's take a step back to Joe's documentary about the protein bar. Is a protein bar really the worst thing you can eat? Well, I'd argue no. And for someone trying to cut down the amount of chocolate bars they eat, it might be a useful stepping stone on their health journey. And in general, scaring the heebie-jeebies out of people isn't helpful. And for context, here's a few things I would argue are more dangerous than eating protein bars. Vaping, sitting all day, half a bottle of wine most nights, loneliness, and being stressed constantly. It's why it's important to focus on whole body well-being. It's never just about nutrition in isolation. And secondly, what about the assumption that all UPFs are bad for us? Well, this has been challenged again by many nutritional scientists, not just the ones working in the food industry, ones working in academia as well. Now, the current system, the NOVA scale, which classifies UPFs, well, that puts a whole grain seeded bread in the same category as a sugar-laden fizzy drink. It groups foods by how processed they are and the number of ingredients, not by nutritional quality. And that's a potential problem because it can turn people off from practical, affordable choices like whole grain bread, which is full of fibre and B vitamins, or fortified plant milks, which contain iodine and calcium, i.e. products which can be nutritionally beneficial. It's really easy to romanticise homemade or artisan food, but let's face it, not everyone has the time, energy, or the money to make their own sourdough or buy it from the posh local farmers market. To assume everyone has a choice on this comes from a place of financial privilege, and yep, I've probably done it as well. Now listen, I'm absolutely not giving UPFs a free pass. Many of them are too easy to overeat, and many of them contain the trifecta of high fat, sugar and salt, and they don't do people any good. But we need context and we need to think critically about it. So that's an explanation of the nuance. If you want something a little bit more grounded in real life, here are 3 practical tips to help you reduce the amount of UPFs you eat. Number 1, start small. Pick one packaged item each week, something you can replace with a whole food equivalent, just one, and then pick another food next week. Number 2, keep portable snacks on hand. That means you're less likely to go buying chocolate bars or crisps or chips if you get hungry when you're caught out. Keep some in your handbag or your desk drawer, something like a handful of nuts and maybe a little dried fruit. And number 3, batch cook when you can. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but having some food ready in the fridge means when you come home frazzled after a long day, you've got something warm and nutritious to look forward to. What are your go-to swaps or tips? Let me know in the comments. And if this video got you thinking, I'll leave another one here about how to reduce evening snacking without feeling deprived, and I'll see you there.